In the rolling hills of Kentucky stands a skeletal remains of a building, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. In the 1920s, it was the final destination for thousands suffering from the White Plague, tuberculosis. Because there was no cure, doctors experimented with gruesome surgeries, and the death toll was so high that they built a body chute, a 500-foot tunnel to slide corpses down the hill so the living patients wouldn't see the hearses. The air in Waverly doesn't just feel cold, it feels heavy, as if the oxygen has been replaced by the final breaths of the forgotten. Ugh. The most haunted spot is room 502. Legend says a nurse took her own life there in 1928 after discovering she was pregnant and unmarried. Decades later, urban explorers still see a woman in a white uniform standing by the window, watching the gates. In the body chute, visitors hear the sound of metal gurneys rattling against the concrete, though the tunnel has been empty for over 50 years. One night, a photographer captured a shadow figure, tall, thin, and faceless, creeping along the ceiling of the cafeteria. They call him the Creeper. He doesn't just watch, he follows. The most unsettling spirit in the sanatorium isn't a vengeful doctor or a weeping nurse, it is a boy named Timmy. Paranormal investigators often bring rubber balls to the fourth-floor hallway and roll them into the darkness. Time and again, the balls stop, pause, and then slowly roll back toward the humans, pushed by invisible, tiny hands. But Timmy isn't the only one there. Deep in the shadows of the surgery wing, visitors have reported the cold grip. It starts as a sudden drop in temperature, so sharp your breath turns to mist, followed by the feeling of icy, invisible fingers tightening around your throat. Some believe it is the spirit of a head surgeon who lost his mind after losing too many patients, still trying to fix anyone who wanders into his operating theater. Whispering. In Waverly, the silence is a lie. If you listen closely, you can hear the scratching of fingernails against the bricks, a desperate plea for an exit that no longer exists. One traveler recently claimed that while walking near room 502, their digital camera battery drained from 100% to 0 in seconds. When they looked at the playback later, they saw a pale, distorted face reflected in the glass of a fire extinguisher cabinet. A face that wasn't there when the photo was taken. As midnight approaches at Waverly, the activity shifts to the roof, where patients were once taken for fresh air treatments, even in the freezing winter. Modern-day visitors often report looking up from the parking lot and seeing hundreds of flickering lights in the windows, as if the hospital is still fully powered and functional. But when they enter, there is only rot and darkness. The most terrifying encounter happened to a security guard in the early 2000s. While patrolling the kitchen area, he smelled fresh bread and heard the clinking of silverware. For a moment, he forgot the building was abandoned. He turned a corner and saw a man in a tattered patient robe sitting at a table, staring at a plate of moldy dust. When the guard's flashlight hit the man, the patient didn't disappear. He looked up, his eyes empty black pits, and whispered, "Is it time for my surgery yet? I've been waiting for 80 years. Before the guard could scream, the man stood up and sprinted toward him with impossible speed, his feet making no sound on the broken glass. The guard ran and never returned to his job. To this day, people find shadow footprints in the dust of the upper floors, footprints that lead to a wall and simply stop, as if the person walked straight through the brick. As the sun sets, the death tunnel seems to breathe. Local legend says that if you stand at the bottom of the 500-foot chute and look up into the darkness, you will see a small, pinpoint light. It isn't a flashlight. It is the soul lantern, carried by an entity that some call the gatekeeper. He is the one who ensures that those who died in the sanatorium never truly cross over. A group of teenagers once broke into the grounds on a dare. They reached the center of the tunnel when they heard a heavy, rhythmic thudding coming from behind them, blocking the exit. It sounded like a massive heart beating inside the mountain. When they turned their lights back, they saw the walls of the tunnel bleeding a thick, black substance that smelled like old copper and decay. The walls remember the pain. They don't just hold the spirits. They trap the living in a loop of the hospital's darkest hours. They ran toward the upper exit, but the door, which had been wide open, was now rusted shut, as if it hadn't been moved in a century. As they hammered on the iron, they heard thousands of faint coughs echoing from the vents above. A voice, cold as a winter grave, whispered directly into one girl's ear. "You're just in time for your intake." They eventually escaped through a broken window, but to this day, all of them suffer from a phantom cough that no doctor can explain. There is one entity at Waverly Hills that even the bravest ghost hunters fear. He is not a patient or a nurse. He is known simply as the Tall Man. He stands nearly 7 feet tall and is seen gliding through the hallways of the 3rd floor. Unlike the other spirits, he has no face, just a void of pure darkness that seems to swallow the light around him. One night, a group of urban explorers decided to spend the night in the old cafeteria. As they sat in a circle, the temperature plummeted until their water bottles froze solid. Suddenly, one of the explorers felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. He looked up and saw the Tall Man looming over him, his long, spindly fingers reaching for the boy's chest. The explorer couldn't move. It was as if his soul was being drained through his skin. In Waverly, the darkness doesn't just hide things. The darkness is a predator, waiting for you to stop running. The group scrambled to leave, but the hallway seemed to stretch, becoming miles long. They passed the same door, room 311, over and over again. Every time they passed, they heard a woman's voice from inside saying, "Please, help me change the bandages." When they finally burst through the main exit, they realized that while they felt they had been running for hours, only 10 minutes had passed in the real world. Time does not move forward in Waverly. It circles like a trapped animal. Driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, the explorer returned to Waverly Hills alone. He didn't climb through a window this time. As he approached the massive front doors, they slowly creaked open on their own, as if the building were exhaling a long-held breath. He walked straight to Ward 5. The key in his pocket began to vibrate, growing so hot it scorched his hip. He found a small, hidden cabinet behind a peeling layer of wallpaper that matched the key perfectly. When he turned the lock, the cabinet didn't contain medicine. It contained a stack of patient files from 1945, all of them blank, except for one. At the bottom of the page, in fresh, wet ink, was his own name. The hospital doesn't just record the dead. It pre-registers the living who wander too deep into its secrets. Suddenly, the lights of his flashlight flickered and died. In the absolute blackness, he heard the sound of hundreds of bare feet running toward him. It wasn't the sound of ghosts. It was the sound of wet skin slapping against the cold floor. He felt a hand, small, like a child's, grab his wrist, and a voice whispered, "You're late for your treatment, doctor." He looked down and saw his own hand beginning to turn pale and translucent. He wasn't being attacked. He was being absorbed. He stopped leaving his house, but his house began to change. One morning, he woke up to find his bedroom walls had turned from blue paint to cracked white hospital tiles. His bed felt hard and narrow, like a medical gurney. When he tried to scream, no sound came out, only a cloud of white mist, as if he were standing in the freezing, fresh air porch of Waverly Hills. Desperate to break the curse, he returned to the sanatorium one last time, not to explore, but to beg for his life. He reached the gate and saw a figure waiting for him. It was the nurse from room 502. She wasn't terrifying anymore. She looked tired, her eyes filled with an infinite sadness. She held out a rusted metal tray with a single glass of water and a pill. "To leave this place, you must finish what you started. A patient cannot be discharged until the fever breaks. He realized then that Waverly wasn't just a prison of stone, it was a hungry memory. The building was trying to recreate the 1920s, and it needed actors to fill the empty beds. He took the tray, but as his fingers touched the metal, he saw the truth. The nurse wasn't a ghost. She was just like him, an explorer from 50 years ago who had stayed too long and had been rewritten into the hospital's history. Months after the explorer vanished, his sister Elena began to dream of him. In the dreams, he wasn't in a hospital. He was behind a sheet of frosted glass, tapping rhythmically. Tap, 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 tap. It was Morse code for "still here." Elena returned to the sanatorium with a sledgehammer. She didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in physics. She went to the exact spot where his name had appeared in the file. As she swung the hammer against the brick wall, the building didn't crumble. It moaned. A thick red liquid began to seep from the cracks. It wasn't blood. It was rusted water from pipes that hadn't functioned in 80 years. Behind the wall, she didn't find a body. She found a shadow room, a space that didn't exist on any blueprint. In the center of the room stood a vintage radio, broadcasting a live signal. She leaned in and heard her brother's voice, clear and cold. "Elena, don't break the walls. The walls are the only things keeping the 1920s from spreading into your world. If I leave, the plague comes with me." The air suddenly turned foul. She looked at her own hands and saw small, dark spots appearing, the first signs of the White Plague. The hospital wasn't just absorbing people. It was a cocoon for an ancient sickness, using human souls to keep the virus alive across time. By the year 2026, the structure of Waverly Hills began to groan under the weight of its own secrets. The shadow room, where Elena stood guard, started to bleed into the local town of Louisville. It started small. People in the valley reported waking up with the smell of ether in their beds, or finding 1920s copper coins on their pillows. One night, the body chute didn't just echo, it exhaled. A thick gray fog rolled out of the tunnel and drifted toward the city. Anyone who breathed it in stopped seeing the modern world. To them, the skyscrapers turned back into Victorian brick buildings, and the cars became horse-drawn hearses. The hospital was no longer content with staying on the hill. It was expanding its territory. Waverly is no longer a building. It is a rip in the fabric of the world, and the ghosts are the stitches holding it together. Elena realized that her brother's voice on the radio was changing. It was no longer just him. It was a chorus of 63,000 voices speaking in unison. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were commanding. "Open the gates," the chorus whispered through every drainpipe and vent. "Let the ward become the world." The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a cough. By the end of 2026, between then and now had completely dissolved. The sky over Kentucky turned a permanent, bruised shade of gray, the color of old X-ray films. Elena was no longer a woman named Elena. She had become the head matron. She sat in a chair made of rusted iron and shadows at the center of what used to be Louisville. People didn't go to work anymore. They reported for rounds. They didn't eat dinner. They took rations on metal trays. The laws of physics had been replaced by the hospital's rules. Silence in the halls. Lights out at dusk. No one leaves until they are cured. But no one was ever cured. In the final moments of the explorer's consciousness, he realized the ultimate horror. The building wasn't a trap for the dead. It was a seed. It had waited 100 years for the world to become crowded enough, connected enough, and fearful enough. Now, the roots of Waverly Hills stretched under every ocean, its corridors winding through the basements of every home on Earth. The Earth is no longer a planet. It is a ward. And the stars above? They aren't suns anymore. They are the flickering hallway lights of a universe that is terminally ill. The great sanatorium did not stop at the edge of the atmosphere. As the transformation completed, people realized that their memories were being erased and replaced with patient histories. Mothers looked at their children and saw only small, pale figures in white gowns. Fathers looked at their hands and found them scrubbed raw with carbolic soap. Deep in the heart of the shadow room, the explorer and Elena sat together. They were no longer siblings. They were the architects of the afterlife. They watched through millions of flickering monitors the eyes of every person on Earth. Every time someone coughed, a new door appeared in their hallway. Every time someone felt a chill, a new wing of Waverly Hills was built. The nightmare is no longer a dream you wake up from. It is the waking world itself, redesigned by the dead to ensure they are never lonely again. The last transmission from the old world came from a small radio station in the mountains. The broadcaster, "If you can hear this, do not sleep. If you sleep, you wake up in a bed with iron bars. If you sleep, the nurse will find you." But the broadcast cut off, replaced by the sound of a heavy metal gate sliding shut. The entire planet had been officially admitted. The sun finally flickered out, replaced by the pale, humming glow of fluorescent hospital lights that stretched across the sky. There was no more day or night, only the eternal night shift. The stars were gone, hidden behind the white fog of a global quarantine. In this new reality, the living were no longer human. They were long-term residents. They forgot their names, their families, and their history. They only knew the sound of the bell that signaled the arrival of the body chute collectors. The explorer, now a faceless entity in a surgeon's mask, stood at the edge of the world, watching the souls slide down the 500-foot tunnel of existence into the void. Memory is the first thing the hospital takes. Hope is the last. In Waverly, even the shadows have to clock in for work. Elena, the matron, walked through the silent streets of the global ward. She carried a ledger made of human skin, ticking off names. When she reached the end of the list, she realized there was only one name left. Yours. She stopped, turned her head toward the screen you were holding, and smiled. The glass of your phone or monitor began to feel cold, like the surface of a morgue slab. Elena paused at the final line of the ledger, her fingers resting on the last name as if it were fragile enough to smudge. The silence around her deepened, swallowing even the echo of her footsteps. For the first time, she hesitated. The ward had always been orderly, predictable. Every name crossed out, every soul accounted for. But this one felt different. The ink seemed fresher, darker, as though it had been written only moments ago. A faint sound broke the stillness, a soft, irregular tapping. Not from the empty streets, not from the wind. It was closer than that. Elena slowly closed the ledger. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, somewhere beyond the boundaries of her world, something shifted, like a presence becoming aware it was being watched. Elena took a single step back. The streets flickered. Another step, and the buildings around her blurred at the edges, as if they were only a fragile illusion struggling to hold shape. She, almost to herself, not yet. With a firm motion, she pressed her hand over the final name. The ink began to fade, resisting at first, then dissolving into the page like mist. The ward exhaled. Lights returned. Distant sounds crept back into existence. Life, however fragile, resumed its quiet rhythm. Elena turned away, the ledger now blank where the last name had been. She walked on, her figure slowly dissolving into the fog between worlds. But before she vanished completely, she paused once more, as if listening, as if waiting. And somewhere, just beyond certainty, the faintest trace of that name began to write itself again.